Well, welcome everybody to
our
panel discussion this morning on TRICS and M&A. I wanted to give you some sense of the issues that we're going to be talking about, which are on the handout that you all have. We're not going to review the issues that we all are aware of, the process of how an acquisition takes place, the issues in a definitive agreement, basic core tax structuring, tax-free reorganizations, and some of the key building blocks of most acquisitions. That's not what we're going to be talking about this morning. The intent today is to talk about issues that are present in these kinds of transactions but don't get a lot of airtime, quite honestly. And they're becoming more and more prominent in transactions that I'm working on and that our panel are as well. If you look at the profile, which you guys don't know, of the attendees this morning, the majority of you are financial advisors, financial professionals, accountants. So you're very sophisticated. You know how these deals are done, which is a good thing. And what that allows us to do is to have an interactive discussion about things that are going on in the community, the kinds of transactions and issues that come up that, quite honestly, aren't black and white. They're gray. And we have to have a bit of a discussion and debate. Now, I'm going to go through the resumes of our panel, but you've got those as well. Our panelists are two CEOs and a tax lawyer that I work with, Tom, on all of my deals. And we're going to be focusing really on issues that boards of directors and management teams talk about. So for the financial professionals in attendance this morning, I would imagine that most of you deal with issues on financial statements and structuring, sort of engineering of financial statements and how that's sort of perceived in the way that we price transactions, and on the tax issues. And we're going to talk a bit about that. But Tom and I have agreed that we're going to talk about stuff that is really these outlier issues. And because I think that would be of most interest to you. Now, our working assumption is as well that the reason you're here is because you want to have a sense of just the whole universe of discussions that management teams and boards of directors have. So that's what we're going to focus on because we think that would be of value to you. This is intended to be interactive, so we're going to have a lot of discussion this morning. Feel free to talk to our panelists directly, to talk to each other. However, you can also see that we have a lot of issues to talk about. We've got 90 minutes. So the question is, how are we going to get through this material? And I'll talk to you a bit about that. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So it's actually a stellar group of people. And I've worked with all of them for well over 10 years. Let me introduce Lynn LeBlanc first. I just found out something this morning which I didn't realize. If you look at Lynn's bio, she's been associated with a number of companies, and 5 of those companies she's been the chief executive that these companies have sold. You haven't been the CEO of all of these companies, but a senior executive. And Lynn and I have worked most recently on the sale of Fast-Scale Technology to EMC. Now, Lynn has made it clear to me that she's an enterprise software person. The reason this is important is because many of the deals being done in the Valley today are technology plays, and this is one of the issues we're going to be talking about. These are much younger companies. They haven't built infrastructure. They're social community companies. They're sort of web-based hosted services companies. They're mobility companies. Many of these companies they're technology rich. They haven't really built a significant business, and they're being sold today, and we all know that. And if you look at some of the statistics, and you've got them actually in the handout, Google is buying a ton of these companies, and the numbers are going way up. That's not the kind of company that Lynn has founded, matured, sold. So just so you understand that, doesn't mean we're not going to talk about the other thing, because that's where a lot of the frenzy in the Valley is taking place today. Bruce and I have worked together and conspired on countless companies. And I've actually, Bruce, I've made a list. Blue Hawk Networks and Rev 2 leading into that, which is Bruce's current company. Madison Lane, which is your core business. Blue Fire Capital, which was an aggregation. And the reason Bruce is here, by the way, Bruce has done a series of aggregations successfully. And these aren't easy to do. And so there's lots of issues on integration, valuation, how do you pick your targets, how do you stop different targets from sort of escalating the prices. You're talking to one set of group, and they find out that you're talking to them, and the price goes up, which was the Blue Fire situation. So there's dynamics of how these deals take place, which we all know it's there, but the question is, how do you handle that? So that's going to be the discussion this morning. So Bruce and I worked together on numerous companies. We were also the CEO of Intalio, a venture-backed company. We were one of the early people at Placeware, which did quite well. And then you and I handled a number of distressed companies as well. So both companies that have done well, companies that we jetted into that helped sort of wind down and get us off land. Okay. Tom Mayer is a named partner with Butterman, Dupree, Dodd, Crowley, and Mayer. And Tom and I worked together for at least 10 years. And Tom is a hardcore tax attorney, but he also does business law. And he's got a very good sense of what works and what doesn't work in transactions. And what I like about Tom, and I told him this, and I told the panelists this morning, is Tom doesn't tell me how to structure deals. He listens to what I have to say, and then he reacts to that and gives me some good ideas on what we might do. So there's all these issues about how to minimize tax for your management team and for your stockholder base. And the buyers always say, we got to do it this way. This is where we're going to report this thing. We're a public company. Yeah, they're a public company, but there are things you can do to benefit your team on the target side of the transaction that you have to propose and discuss and debate with the acquirer. Now, some acquirers, like Randus, like Google, and you and I work on, okay, they say, this is the way it is. We're not going to talk about any other structuring alternatives. This is the way we report. This is the way the taxes are going to be addressed, and we don't care. And we'll talk about how Google does its deals. But that doesn't mean you can't have the discussion. And if you lose on the tax issues, you can gain on something else. And so the dynamic of negotiation come up in all these transactions. Okay, so that's our panel. A tremendous group of people. Now let's talk about how we're actually going to get through all this information. Okay, so you've got a handout, and we've got 10 topic areas. We may or may not cover them all. So we divided them into sort of 3 general categories. Front-end topics, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. So these are topics that management teams have to consider before you get into a transaction. And we all know what the issues are. The question is, how do they shake out? So we're going to have a discussion about this, and I'm thinking we spend maybe 20 minutes on this. This is the core discussion we're going to have today. When you're in a transaction, what does it look like? This clearly is a different kind of transaction where you're on the buy side of the fence, and so Bruce is going to help us through this discussion. Pricing, taxes, these are liability issues, and then these are sort of these issues that Tom and I have addressed, and there's a new one that we're on a transaction that we're dealing with right now that we should discuss as well. And then, if we have time, so we're going to spend the most of our discussion on these issues. These issues are what happens if the deal doesn't happen, basically. And we may or may not get to that. And you can have some of our thoughts in the handout. And by the way, the handout was just sort of stream of conscious bullet points for our discussion. I wanted to share that with you because in the event that we don't cover all the topics that we want to, you have something to kind of consider and at least know what at least our group feel the main issues are in acquisitions today.